Hi, everybody. Welcome to a Wednesday night at Olympic. I want you all to know that it is a historic evening here at Olympic. This is officially the most people we have ever had on the stage at one time. So no matter what happens after this, we have set a record. We have hit a milestone here at Olympic tonight. So you're all, I'm glad to all have you all here as part of this historic occasion. I want to tell you a little bit of logistics. I'll do that right off the top because I frequently forget about the logistics. You are, as you've seen, you are allowed to have tea in here. You are not allowed to kick over your tea. You're not allowed to spill your tea or anyone else's tea. You can come and go as you please. If you run out of tea and want more, you can go get more. This is not public school. You don't have to raise your hand and ask. We are live streaming this to the internet. I don't know if you guys have heard of this thing. It's crazy. If what you say doesn't go through a microphone, it doesn't really make it onto the stream. So we actually have, are the overheads on? Okay, so during the Q&A, if you ask your question loud, the internet will be able to hear you. So if you are suddenly possessed by an urge to shout your social security number into the room, do not give in to that urge. I'll let the giant team of wonderful human beings on stage tell us a little bit about how the actual night is going to go, when it's time to ask questions, when it's not. And I will just conclude by saying, on a personal note, one of the things that's been just absolutely amazing for me as part of this wild and crazy experiment that is the Olympic is all of the people that I've gotten to meet as part of this project. And many of you who are here in the room, I met here, and one absolute delight has been to meet Cathy Coleman. We didn't know each other before this, and Cathy came here for the Chalice, which is the first Wednesday of every month. It's a psychedelic salon that leans towards the, I'm sure you're all interested in this. If you haven't already been to a Chalice, what are you doing? It leans towards the like weird, nebulous, strange, like there's a lot of energy right now around, psychedelic therapy and psychedelic science, which like I'm super into. I'm literally a scientist, but there's less energy going into the kind of strange, mysterious, synchronistic, unexplainable, beautiful, poetic humanities end of the psychedelic spectrum. And that's what the Chalice focuses on. And after Cathy's Chalice, I just cornered her in the lobby and I was like, you have to come back here. Like, I don't care what you do, just come back. And so I'm thrilled to say that she's back. So we've had her here to do a divination workshop. And now I'm thrilled, Cathy, to have you here to talk about the book. So please join me in welcoming Cathy Coleman.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Oh, here. Yeah, there. There we go. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much to Alana and Katie and Emily here at the Olympic. It's been a real pleasure. I love coming here. Got such good energy. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And thanks to our panelists, who are all authors in this book. They all have essays, and they all have a connection to Ralph. And so how we're going to proceed is I'm going to do just a little intro, a little sharing about the book. And then we're going to start with Carla and just go down. Each person's going to share for 5 minutes or so. And also, just if your neighbor needs help with the microphone, you can just be mindful of that. Somebody will help you, somebody to the side of you. And then after Leigh, I'll share just a little bit more about my part in the book. And then we're going to have Q&A. And then we'll break for just a few minutes, and then you fill your teacup, and we'll do some Q&A. So, and I'll just let each of them introduce themselves when it's your turn. Okay, and so anyway, how this book came about, Ralph died almost 6 years ago in March, and his memorial was held in May, and various people spoke at the memorial, and after the memorial, one person, Alan Levin, who spoke, sent me the transcript that he'd written out of his speech, and I thought, oh, this is so good, I should publish it. I just kind of held that in my mind. And then another person from Germany contacted me and said, have you ever thought of, doing a Festschrift for Ralph? So a Festschrift is a compilation of essays usually about an academic, and it's usually a pretty academic compilation of essays for usually when the person is alive, and somebody has to decide to do it because it's a lot of work to pull these things together. So Ralph never had that when he was alive, but there's actually a word for it if the person has died, called a Gedenkschrift. And so anyway, I don't use that term too often in here because I don't think anybody's ever heard of it. But anyway, so I thought, well, yeah, I had thought that it would be great if Ralph had this sort of thing. So we have a foundation that Ralph and I founded in just right after we were married in 1989, and the Green Earth Foundation, and we have 4,000 people on the email list. And so I just sent out a message and said, oh, we have this idea, is anybody interested? And I had about 80 responses pretty immediately that said, yes, I want to do this. I thought, well, okay, that's got some traction. So I got organized. I worked with my editor, who is also Ralph's editor, who actually happens to be a longtime family friend who actually lives only a few blocks from us. So it's very convenient. And so we got to work together and put out the specs and the word and started gathering the essays. And then I thought, well, who else, wouldn't have seen the newsletter or might not have seen the newsletter or who should be in this book? And then I did some inviting of people too. And I ended up with 87 essays, and only 60 are published in this book for space reasons. But the other 27 are on the Green Earth Foundation website, greenearthfound.org. And so maybe I just start with a couple of things about a few entries from Ralph's, mostly his professional kind of / psychedelic life. Although there are actually a number of sections here. So there's overview and early life. There's a section on scholar, educator, and mentor. There's psychedelic medicines for healing and visions. There is a section on esoteric modalities and sacred storytelling. There's a section on green psychology and artistic expression and death, conscious dying, and the afterlife. And then finally, family, with a contribution from our daughter, and my son, and myself. So actually, I thought I would start maybe with a little piece from Alan, since he was the seed planter. And so Alan and Ralph knew each other from their time in actualism together in Southern California. They worked with this sort of inner light process called Agni Yoga. And it became Ralph's sort of core, it's kind of his core method for working with everything in his life, personal issues, professional, working with clients, etc. So Alan says, as mentioned before, Ralph continued to use the tools and techniques of Agni Yoga, the primary teaching of Russell Schofield and the School of Actualism, for the rest of his life. They were an integral part of all the teachings, the ceremonies and rituals he guided, and they influenced his numerous writings and talks. While he continued to explore with boundless curiosity the many traditions and lineages of consciousness and spirituality, he always integrated them with Agni Yoga, the great work, the light work of personal and global transformation. Final personal note, I'm thinking of one of Ralph's guiding spiritual teachers, Gurdjieff, and his book, Meetings with Remarkable Men. On my life journey, Ralph was the most remarkable human being I have had the privilege to know and walk with. I know that the work of earthing, which is an actualism term, to which he dedicated his life, expanded over time and found expression in his deep commitment to Mother Earth and helping humanity to find a way through the political and ecological crises of our times. May we all open to his continued presence and guidance in our lives. And then there's a few pieces that I love about Stan. I guess I'll just read the part of their meeting because it's kind of magical. And so this is from Stan Groff. Several months before Ralph's death, he and I realized that we had known each other for more than half a century. Looking back, meeting Ralph was one of the amazing synchronicities that accompanied me during my first visit to the United States. In May 1965, I participated and presented at a conference in Amityville, New York, organized by Harold Abramson, titled The Use of LSD in Psychotherapy and Alcoholism. When the conference ended, I needed to get to New Haven to visit the Litzes, and I didn't have any money. I went to the microphone and asked if anybody could give me a ride. The first participant who offered me a lift was Peter John. Peter John was an editor of the Psychedelic Review with Ralph and Timothy, Larry, and Alfred and Gunther Weil. At this point, my journey had an unexpected, extraordinary twist. It turned out that Peter John needed to make a detour. This stop was at Millbrook, the estate that was owned by Peggy Hitchcock, the Mellon family heiress. Peggy and her brothers had offered Tim Leary and his friends and colleagues a place where they could carry on their psychedelic experimentation. I could not believe my good fortune. I got the chance to see this extraordinary psychedelic community and meet Tim Leary and Ralph. Unfortunately, I missed Ramdas, who was out of town. Tim and Ralph gave me a signed copy of their book, The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the photos, his photo of the autographed copy is in the book. And then let's see here. Here's a little clip from Charlie Grove's passage. I think probably all of you know Charlie Grove, but if you don't, he's he does psychedelic research in Southern California at UC Irvine. And he said, spending time with Ralph was a never-ending opportunity to learn, particularly about the topic that I had long considered to be of compelling interest, albeit at the time for me, somewhat hidden and elusive, the world of psychedelics. For me, it was a time of great discovery, opening up to this remarkable realm of inner experience to which we and our ancestors had long been in ignorance, denied access, and were hardly aware of throughout much of history. With Ralph as guide and teacher for these deep inner dives, the great mysteries vividly reveal themselves. It was also clear from joining Ralph for these events that strong safety parameters needed to be observed. Much of this was in the form of ritual, and I often appreciated Ralph's emphasis on maintaining structural coherence and group cohesion, gently containing tendencies of some to behave in more rambunctious and intrusive manners. Ralph would take some good-natured ribbing, including being dubbed the Teutonic Shaman, but his patient admonitions to the group to maintain the personal discipline and decorum that the situation called for, and above all, to stay in their own space, I always appreciated. Some can relate. Let's see, and then here is a piece from Dennis McKenna. In 2018, Ralph published his last book, Searching for the Philosopher's Stone, Encounters with Mystics, Scientists, and Healers. His chapter on Terence and me in that book, the brothers Terence and Dennis McKenna, is one of the kindest, most empathic, and accurate depictions of our unique fraternal bond and our shared obsessions that I have seen published anywhere. I will forever be grateful to Ralph for including this chapter. It provides a detailed and non-judgmental unpacking of our relationship. He brought to bear the insights of a skilled clinical psychologist who could see below the surface to the inner dynamics, who knew both of us, including our many warts, and yet loved and admired us greatly. Both Terrence and I, of course, felt the same about Ralph. Much of the content of the chapter is derived from an extensive series of email exchanges that we had in 2011, while I was in the process of writing my memoir. These excerpts have not been published elsewhere to my knowledge, and they are well worth reading. It was a lively exchange of ideas. I only regret that it could not have been in person, but it was rich nonetheless. Ralph Metzner was one of a kind. He was a good man, a courageous explorer of the frontiers of human experience, an exemplar of a life lived with clarity, curiosity, and compassion. So I think on that note, I'll just pass it to Carla to share.
How about that? Okay. Hi. So I'm Carla Detchen. I'm an integration coach, and I'm also the host of the Psychedelic Divas podcast. And in 1996, when I met Ralph, if someone had told me that I'd be sitting here publicly talking about these things, not just to you guys, but on a podcast, which I would have been like, well, what's a podcast? I don't think I would have been able to comprehend, because it was so deep underground at that time. So I just want to acknowledge that. What I want to talk about, so y'all can get the book. So, buy the book, read what I said. It's good. Yeah. But what I want to talk about is Ralph's impeccable ability to create a container, a psychedelic container. And you're like, well, so we always talk about that, like, oh, is the container, how's the container feel? What is a psychedelic container? So the psychedelic container is like, it contains all of it. It's your mindset, your intention, it's the setting itself, it's who's there, it's the dose, it's the drug, it's the entire experience is the container. And a leaky, unsafe container is going to wreak havoc with your psyche. But a well-held, well-woven, strong container allows you to relax, to surrender, to let your guard down, to go where you need to go. So that those parts of you aren't like, well, are we safe? Well, why is that person crying? I don't know. What's happening? What's going on? It's like, when the container is held, you can let go. I didn't know any of that. I lucked out by landing in my two main teachers held impeccable containers. My other teacher, who's still alive, and we don't use her name, she was trained by the secret chief, Leo Zeff. And so I want to talk a little bit about what goes into a container, and I'm going to keep this short. There'll be more. By the way, it's going to be my next episode, one of my next episodes in March on the podcast, so you should listen. But it's the Ralph set the container by first choosing the right place. He set the container by choosing the right people. Almost always, not everybody, but almost everyone who came through was someone that you felt, like, yes, I can be next to this person, and this is good, this is safe. I'm engaged here. But the way he really set the container was through ceremony, was through ritual, and through lots and lots of boundaries. Maybe a little too many boundaries, okay? But when she was just describing there, that sounded rowdy as hell compared to, by the time I showed up in the mid 90s with Ralph had structure. And as much as the rebel in me pushed against it, I fully honor the importance, the critical nature of that. And this is one of the things that I'm really seeing missing in today's psychedelic world. That's why I wanted to speak to this. And so when you are going to choose, where you're going to go, like vet your shaman. start thinking about, well, what kind of container do I want? And does this person feel like the kind of person who will create the kind of container that I want? Do I feel safe? Do I feel held? Do I understand the parameters? Will there be a ritual? Will there be talking? Will I be able to talk to people next to me or not talking? Like all of these things go into the psychedelic container. And when you don't know, then that's where your brain goes. The little, monkey brain, just like, why is she crying? Is anybody taking care of her? I'm not sure. It's like, oh, well, and then you can't do your own work because, of course, none of us want to do our own work. So we're all like, oh, let me just go take care of somebody else. It's much easier to take care of the world than yourself. So I'm really honoring that aspect of Ralph and the Germanic, boundaried, structured aspect of him. It was invaluable. Thanks.
Thank you.
I just
By the
have,
way, I would just say, if I'll just give you a little 1 minute warning if
Yeah.
you go
Yes.
too long. Yeah, go
Thank
for
you,
it.
Cathy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
well, I just have to tell one quick little vignette, and I shouldn't lose any seconds on my program. But talking about Ralph setting boundaries in the structure, one of my favorite, very small stories is he was laying out the structure, and somebody who probably hadn't been there before was complaining about and could have been made some comment about the rules, and this went on for a moment or two, and finally Ralph said, "There are no rules, only guidelines," and I've quoted that many times. I love that way of looking at the world. I enjoy chaos, and I'm often bringing chaos. So no rules, just guidelines. And so Ralph played so many roles in my world. I mean, he was a teacher, he was a friend, he was a guide, he was a dean, and it's hard to cover all of what Ralph contributed to us. And so I'd like to talk extemporaneously from the heart. Is something I learned from people like Ralph. But it's hard to cover everything you want in a few minutes. So I did write it out. And so forgive me for that. It's a little cooler doing it that way, but there's a lot of warmth that this comes from. First, I want to acknowledge and thank Cathy. It took a lot for this project to happen, and she did a tremendous job bringing together contributors, shaping the book, linking the chapters and sections, and of course contributing her own piece about their relationship, sharing deep life and relationship lessons. They're pretty profound stuff, actually, and it's one of many chapters in the book that I really appreciate. Cathy and Sophia both have beautiful pieces in the book, which is so fitting because on top of all the ways Ralph showed up in this world, he was a dedicated family man. This book is a sort of biography. In fact, it is a biography, but not in the conventional sense. I think we get a much more thorough sense of Ralph Metzner than in a conventional biography. We are getting all these different perspectives from an impressive group of sensitive and smart, generally brilliant people. These are not just sentimental tributes. These are highly personal stories that capture so many expressions of the essence of Ralph. It would be difficult for one person's biography to capture all of what we find here. Keep in mind that the friends, family, colleagues, and students that have contributed had deep connections with Ralph, usually coming out of profound self and transpersonal explorations. Reading through this book, we quickly feel these shares are coming from a deep, heartful, and insightful place, and that people use this opportunity to write about Ralph and their experiences with him to recall and further process some of their deepest life moments. And it is really something to appreciate how much Ralph showed up in the most profound ways in the evolution of the consciousness studies movement, the birth of the psychedelic movement, twice, by the way, and the personal lives of so many people. You know, that comment about twice, the psychedelic movement twice. So you look at the 60s at Harvard, and Ralph played such a prominent role there with Leary and Alpert. And then again, in a less high profile way, but just as important, in the next psychedelic renaissance, beginning in, I don't know where we dated exactly, the early 80s, the late 70s, that is a second renaissance. And Ralph was right there for that one too, in a quieter, a little less high profile way, and in the personal lives of so many people. Sometimes he shows up as a therapist, sometimes the wizard, shaman, alchemist, sometimes the professor insisting on a certain standard, sometimes as a dean, bringing an incredible flow of high-powered consciousness studies people to CIIS. Many of us at CIIS call the 80s the golden years when Ralph was dean. Other people at the Institute in other years might call their years the golden years. I don't know. But it was a very special time. He and President John Broomfield, separately but synergistically together, made a huge contribution in bringing environmental consciousness to CIIS. One of Ralph's books, Green Psychology, as an important contribution to our emerging green consciousness. He brought Maria Gimbutas to speak at CIIS, and it was obvious how much he respected her and valued her presence. That moment, I think, contributed to the emergence of the Women's Spirituality Program. He also brought so many others of his friends and colleagues to do guest lectures, teach classes, weekend workshops, keynote commencement speeches. Michael Harner, Fridtjof Capra, Stan Grof, Terence McKenna, Jill Peirce, Rupert Sheldrake, John Seed, Ram Dass. I'm sure I'm missing several people probably. It was an amazing time. And I'm not sure how much the CIS community fully appreciated at the time how much Ralph was behind so much of it. Important also to acknowledge that with all of Ralph's brilliance and multitude of areas of focus, he also very much had a light, playful side. On that note, I'd like to read a short piece from my contribution. When CIS was moved from Dolores Street to Ashbury Street as part of making the old elementary school our own, Ralph fully participated in a tiling project led by Rowena Patti, another awe-inspiring creative person that Ralph brought to the school, I think. In the basement, there was large round foundational pillars. We tiled one as a tree of life and 4 others as the 4 elements. This is not a pompous professor sitting behind the desk. Ralph modeled creativity and playfulness as part of an integrated life. Ralph, as shamanic guide, medicine guide, spiritual teacher, knew how to set boundaries, as well as fully bring himself to the teaching. Some nearly 40 years ago, our men's group invited him to lead a circle for us. It is a point of pride that the invitation and circle caused Ralph to sort of come out a little bit more after the crazy 60s, where he had sort of pulled back from a lot of that work and was focused more on his dean position and professor position. And he began his quiet inner work with groups. That he liked and respected the group enough for that to happen was very meaningful to us. In that first circle, he wanted to model radical openness. Most of us were new to this format, and when it was time to do a first round of sharing, he went first. I'm getting a little choked up. And he shared the story of the loss of his son. It was a powerful share and left little room for superficiality. He did not give directions, he set them by example.
Well, this is an interesting assortment of people who had different relationships to Ralph. And Ralph had many, as you said, different persona that he inhabited. But I'm actually also going to read a little something. Oh, who am I? Which depends on who you're talking to. I'm Maria Mangini. I sometimes describe myself as a psychedelic relic. Katie in this room introduced me as the youngest person who was part of the Millbrook community who was not a child there. So I had a old, not Ralph was not there by the time that I got there. I got sort of a taste of what that community could have been like when they were all there, but nevertheless. I think probably the best way to begin what I want to say is to read just the last couple of paragraphs of what I put in this festschrift. Ralph embodied an attitude, an approach, and a way of thinking that was remarkable in its spaciousness and grace. He was like a friendly neighborhood idea musician with whom one could get together for a relaxed and improvisational thought jam session. This contrasted with my earlier experiences with the more inflexible version of psychedelic science, like the difference between classical music and jazz. With classical music, there's a composer and a conductor who controls each musician's input to create a harmonious but hierarchical and static composition in conformity with a code established in advance. In jazz improvisation, there is no need for a consistent leader, and the music is a process of continual creation, new every time it is played. The player's parts intersect and blend as a democratically developed vision in which the process is more important than any finished product. It's really good for one's musicianship to jam with someone who has a lot more chops than you do. And I'm so grateful that I sometimes got to play with Ralph. Now, when I wrote that, Cathy actually contacted me and said, did you know that Ralph was a musician and was a trained musician and had a lot of musical chops? And actually I didn't. The only real musical encounter I had with Ralph was having to berate him for making too much noise in the room next door to the one where I was trying to do something else. That quality of being able to be spontaneous and to be able to use the uprushing truth of whatever one was experiencing at a particular time is the thing that I really, the one of Ralph's characteristics that I really wanted to address this evening was the one that was mentioned about Cathy's other work here at the Alembic, which is that he was a diviner and he was a really skillful and studied practitioner of a lot of different kinds of tools for accessing different parts of human consciousness that we don't pay a lot of attention to in contemporary society. But those tools are very it's possible for them to be very skillfully employed, and it can be a whole life's work just to learn how to use one tool, like to learn how to really be an adept of the I Ching, or how to really know the Tarot in all the different ways that it's been iterated in all the times that it's been around. But I also think that there is a particular kind of quality of being able to get out of one's own way that is the thing I was trying to describe when I talked about the difference between jazz and classical music, where it is possible to be so much in the moment that you take in whatever it is that the energetic environment that you're inhabiting is delivering to you, untutored, unfiltered, uncensored by any of those sort of societally imposed structural things, which makes it possible, if I had listened to the insight that I had at my kitchen table, that Google was a much better search engine than Ask Jeeves, when I first had that idea, it would have done a good thing for me. But if you can't get out of your own way, a lot of important stuff can miss you in life. And I think that's one of the things that Ralph really knew how to do and really exemplified and gave permission for. And I feel like a lot of my capacities, to the extent that I have them to do that, were encouraged and facilitated by my contact with him.
Just before you go, David, I just wanted to say a word that Maria's contribution is called Mystical Living, Classical and Improv. And I just want to reiterate that I was astonished that she wrote this piece, because basically Ralph had about, this blending or this of classical and improv. And Ralph was trained as a child in classical music. And then for many years, he didn't play music. And in his 60s, he took up improv. And so he really did have this big shift. And that she totally picked up on and didn't know this at all. So anyway, it's just astonishing.
Okay, I'm David Lukoff, and now a retired professor of psychology. I taught for many years at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in Saybrook and JFK, and actually got to know Ralph personally for the first time through CIS, where he invited me to present in some of his classes, and then later brought me on as a faculty member. And what I want to share, though, is about how working with Ralph enabled me to recover my ancestors. You know, I had other psychedelic experiences prior to working with Ralph, and it connected to my origins in stardust and my single-celled origins and my monkey self and so on. But I really knew nothing about my ancestors. Both my grandparents came over to the United States when they were very, very young. And there was kind of a taboo about talking about the old country. And I knew nothing about any of my ancestors beyond my grandparents, and they didn't share much, and they had been kids when they came over, so probably didn't know a whole lot about it. But it was a kind of source of disconnection and puzzlement to me. My wife, who's from Germany, can trace her ancestral lineage back 800 years. So I decided that I wanted to do a session with Ralph around my ancestors, and there is a long history of use of ibogaine amongst what were then called the Pygmies. I think there's a more politically correct name for them now, but they used ibogaine in their ancestor worship rituals. And Ralph was, if you had a chance to work with him, it was amazing because he really gave you a lot of choices about how you wanted to do your experience, including which substances. And so I decided to do an ibogaine trip. And actually, can I take you up on your offer?
Absolutely.
So hold that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, with the intention to connect with my ancestors, one of the things I did was just a little more reading of Jewish history, and I hadn't at that point in my life been to Israel, so I wanted to learn about, you know, the territory that my ancestors came from. I did one of those DNA tests, and I'm 98.7% Ashkenazi Jewish, so that is my heritage back there. So I started, though, the experience with ibogaine by kind of invoking my grandparents and trying to really visualize. I knew them only as old men, and then as the drug started to take them on, I began to see them as children. And all of a sudden, that was a whole different kind of connection with them. And I began to really see that, you know, they had tough childhoods. They came from very poor families. Hunger was an issue. There's a story in my family about my grandfather being, my father being sent out to the store with no money because his parents, my grandparents, didn't want other neighbors to know that they didn't have money for food. So, you know, it was a tough childhood. And part of that phase of this experience was really acknowledging what is a well-documented part of Jewish history. It's been documented in books like World of Our Fathers and so on, that, you know, for the first time really in history of the Jewish people, here in America, we were able to go to universities, own land, own houses, have professions, and so on. And, you know, I was just very moved that they had taken the steps necessary to bring that into my life. But then I found I wanted to kind of really go back. I sort of already knew some things about my grandparents, but what about my other ancestors? So Ralph did offer a booster if you wanted it, and I decided, yes, I want to go deeper. And I took that, and then I started to be surrounded by images of things like Masada in Israel, famous place if you look it up, the Jewish exodus from Egypt, and I felt like I was, part of that. And then all of a sudden, I was surrounded by a bunch of Jewish men wearing kaftans, and if you've been to Israel, you see a lot of men walking around with these fur caps and 100-degree temperatures and so on. And I was all of a sudden surrounded by them. And I expected that, my ancestors are here, and I expected to be welcomed and to be able to connect with them and so on. But I could sense that, they were not approaching me. They were definitely had a stay away kind of attitude. And I wondered, why were they ostracizing me? And I had this insight that, as I mentioned, my Jewish heritage was very strong, and that I had really violated a real tenet of Jewish culture and actually religious law, in that I had married a shiksa. I had married somebody who's not Jewish. So I had ended that whole lineage that went back 3,000 or 4,000 years by marrying somebody where my children are not considered Jewish by Jewish law. But I went ahead and initiated a conversation with them about wanting to meet my elders and asking them to show me something about them. And at this point, my journey kind of sped up. And all of a sudden, I was part of a tribe crossing the desert. I was building a Jewish temple. I was running through the streets being chased by soldiers on a drunken pogrom. My family and I were pulling a cart with all of our possessions together, with all the other Jews ordered to leave the country. I was dancing all night at a Jewish wedding celebration. And, after that experience, I felt, oh, wow, I've been given a lot of what I was asking for. But the men in their kaftans were still there, and I was still feeling ostracized, that there was still an abyss between me and them. And just spontaneously, I invited them to visit and see the life that I was leading. And at the time, I was living in Petaluma in a beautiful 100-year-old Victorian house that I showed them, with my wife and 2 kids in this rose garden in our backyard. I was able to tell them I had a profession, I owned this house, and really it was thanks to their many years of persistence that I was able to live in a real community, not a Jewish ghetto. So there were no hugs at parting with these elders. There was no blessings, but I had a sense that of goodwill being radiated by my ancestors. I had a sense that, I now have a connection with my ancestors. I don't know if historically any of that would be true, but the connection was there. And I realized I passed along to my half-Jewish kids of difficult karmic situations. My wife was not, we were never members of church, so they didn't have a Christian background really either. And this is something that they will need and are resolving in their lives. They're now both in their 30s. And when the time is right, I do know a medicine that might help them on their ancestor quest. So, the only thing I want to add to that is just how, to me, I've done numbers of other psychedelic experiences, but Ralph was able to, really connect to the whole history of psychedelic drug use. So we were not just taking a psychedelic like LSD that had just been created out of a lab, but we were going back into the human heritage, which now we know, anthropological research, that we humans have been using these substances for 10,000 years. So this is all sort of new in our culture now. But Ralph, I think, was able to really work that connection for it to re-own these practices and these substances in our contemporary lives with full awareness and knowledge of the way these substances were used historically in our culture. Thank you.
My name is Leigh Marz. I'm really happy to be here. And it was my husband, Michael Ziegler, who introduced me to Ralph. And he was making that introduction because we were getting serious and he wanted me to know what he'd been up to. He's like, it might not be your cup of tea, but it turns out it was. So, Ralph was my teacher, my friend, and for over a decade, I also served on the Green Earth Foundation board with Cathy, and where I committed my time to the written legacy that he has left behind, 20-something books, and this beautiful book as well. So a few months after, just 2 months after Ralph's passing, I attended a circle, my first since his passing, and I'd hoped he might pay me a visit. I knew it was kind of soon, but I thought, I'm open, and by luck he did, by way of song. In this particular circle, we closed a whole arc of an evening with rounds of singing, original, spontaneous songs, which might strike you as mortifying, and I assure you it is. And I think the point, because Ralph also used this technology, if you will, is to bypass the habit of narration, storytelling, and kind of grooving that story we tell ourselves about ourselves into a certain way. So getting out of that habit and having something novel come through. Anyway, so I want you to know, I want to say that I am not a singer and I am not a songwriter. I want to say that because you're going to find out in just a minute, but I want to have said it first. Okay. So we were using this method. My time came and the song Cosmic Manners, I call it, came to me to describe the guidance and occasionally what felt more like etiquette that Ralph taught us along the way. Yeah. I think, are you okay holding this?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I have an instrument. Just remember. How do I want to sit? I think I want to kind of get at the end of the chair. Got it. Okay, thank you. Good thinking. Yeah. Okay. I learned my cosmic manners from Ralph Metzner. I call him friend, though some knew him better. I do, however, have the great pleasure of tending to the things that he loves most. I learned my cosmic manners from Ralph Metzner. I call him friend, though some knew him better. I do, however, have the great pleasure of tending to the things that he loves most. His beloved wife, Cathy, his daughter, Sophia, his stepson, Eli, and his 20-something books. His beloved wife, Cathy, his daughter, Sophia, his stepson, Eli, and his 20-something books. I learned my cosmic manners from Ralph Metzner. I call him friend, though some knew him better. I do, however, have the great pleasure of tending to the things that he loves most. When you come across a guide, be sure to be polite. Ask them to join you by your side. When you come across a guide, be sure to be polite. Ask them to join you by your side. I learned my cosmic manners from Ralph Metzner. I call him friend, though some knew him better. I do, however, have a great pleasure of tending to the things that he loved most. Intention, attention, awareness. Intention, attention, awareness. Intention, attention, awareness. Intention, attention, awareness. We learned our cosmic manners from Ralph Metzner. We call him friend, though she knew him better. We do, however, have the great pleasure of tending to the things that he loved most. I'll just say that the unpacking of the lessons in each of those is in the book. I would love for you to peek at that, what each of those are referring to. And I want to thank Rose for putting that music. She's an actual singer and an actual musician, and she put the score, and so the score actually lives on the website. So it was a big edge to ask someone like Rose to do this for me, but thank you. Yeah. So thank you, Ralph, for totally radically changing my life, pointing it towards healing and transformation and vision. And I am dedicated to the things that you love most.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to pull up the end here with some kind of more personal things. I actually wanted to read the last paragraph of Ralph's brother, Robin. His younger brother, Robin, wrote a piece. I mean, his older brother was, he died just a little after Ralph. But anyway, so Robin wrote a piece called The Unusual Second Son. But here at the very tail end, he talks about his parents, which kind of ties into some of the ancestor references that people have made. It says, to my mind, the legacy that Ralph took away from his father was more his scholarly bent of mind and reading habit, his disciplined, phenomenal memory, and thorough work ethic. And from both his parents, their internationalist, democratic, pacifist opinions. The crucial relevant influence on his future surely came from his time at Oxford and Harvard. His parents were sometimes puzzled about their unusual second son in the United States, but they tried to understand. Wolfgang and Jill divorced in 1954, but remained good friends for life. The relationship between Ralph and his parents was excellent throughout their lives, for Ralph had much in common with each of them. And just a little bit from our daughter. This is from a letter that she wrote when we knew he was dying. I suggested to her that she write him a letter and say what she wanted to say to him, and so she did. And this is just part of it, but a few lines. Dear Dad, you're my beloved father. You've given me an incredible life, a life of learning, laughter, love, and letting be. You've taught me to love unconditionally, to accept what is, to be present in the moment, and to always be the best that I can be. You've taught me to be honest, humble, and responsible. You've guided me through the most challenging times of my life. You've been my teacher, my guiding light. You've taught me to connect with the deepest parts of myself, to get in touch with my own inner wisdom and strength, and you have taught me how to connect with others in deep and sacred ways. And her closing is, you are a most remarkable man, and I feel blessed to have known you as my father. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving me this special life, for supporting me, loving me, and teaching me. I love you and hold you in my heart as I go forward in my life, making you proud. With love, always, Sophia. And then just a little piece from my son, who was 2.5 when I came into the relationship with Ralph. And so Ralph is his stepdad, but they had a very strong relationship. And he said, I thank Ralph for my connection to and appreciation for nature and the planet. We often walk together, which is where we would do most of our talking. He spent so much time sitting at his desk writing, but moving his body and being out in nature remained incredibly important to him. Walking and talking with Ralph gave me some of my best memories, whether it was exploring a jungle in Costa Rica, traipsing through gardens in Hawaii, or just walking the dogs around the neighborhood. He taught me to love being in nature and to appreciate the natural world. Every night at the dinner table, Ralph reminded us of our connection to the great goddess Earth, as he said grace, thanking her for the nourishment of our bodies and the healing of our lives. At every dinner with friends, we would toast to the 4 L's: life, love, laughter, and letting be. Writing about this now makes me realize how much of an impact those key phrases had on me. And finally, my piece. So I knew Ralph in 4 different ways, and I've written about that in my essay. So first, I came to CIS as a doctoral student in 1981, and he was there as professor. I didn't know anything about Ralph Metzner before I came. And so I had him for actually 7 different classes. He had a wide reach. The school was small, so he did a lot. He taught everything from statistics to esoteric personality theories and altered states, which Roger and I had. Everybody wanted to take altered states of consciousness from Ralph. And anyway, and then after I was there for about a year, I started working at CIS, as did Roger. I mean, we both worked there for a long time. And so I quickly was promoted to Director of Student Services, I was kind of over the whole administrative side of CIS, and Ralph was the academic dean. And so we pretty much kind of ran the school, led the school, because we had both sides of it. And those were the golden days, I think, they were pretty golden. Then after about 4 years, Ralph asked me to be in a relationship with him. That story's in here too. I won't read it, but just one thing I'll read, which is about Ralph undertook another vision quest before our wedding and sought to obtain a vision for our life together. He wrote about this inspiration. While in the mountains, I'm asked to go on 2 symbolic walks to obtain a vision for my upcoming marriage to Cathy. In the first, I'm to test my commitment to her by climbing down a steep and rocky canyon and find her spirit. Finding her and the commitment was easy. The second was a repeated walk in the day and at night along a high ridge to find my vision for our relationship. The path wound through cool, shade-giving clumps of trees and across sunny, open meadows covered with wildflowers. I talked with her in my mind. Her soul is as a field of wildflowers. I saw us walking together, meeting and interacting with many other individuals and groups, working in creative collaboration, dancing and ritual play. Togetherness and open space was the mantric marriage formula I was given. I danced for my love. Cathy liked the marriage walk. Indeed, we traveled together in open spaces. The vision describes our 3rd union, that of our 31-year marriage. How amazing that Ralph would intentionally seek a vision for our marriage by doing a vision quest. I thought, and writing it out. So there's a lot of other things, but I'll just close with the fact that as I was writing this book and I'd written my essay, I realized that I really had a 4th connection with him, and that was with him in the afterlife. That even though he's not here in the flesh, I still have this ongoing relationship with him, and that's a pretty profound part of the relationship. And I call the chapter the sacred hoop of partnership, and that's kind of part of the wheel. Ralph's, if he had a religion he loved most, it was Native American spirituality, and So, yeah, I'll just read this. This is the final thing. Ralph is beloved in the afterlife. Our bond extends now to me connecting with him in the afterlife. He has visited me a number of times in my dreams and in deep, loving connections, and I met him for satisfying interactions through mediums. Through working on this tribute book, I continue to be deeply connected to him. This is our fourth union, that between his world in the afterlife and mine still here, furthering his publications, influences, and our ongoing family life. This fourth union completes the sacred hoop of partnership with him as my professor, colleague, husband, and beloved in the afterlife. I want to close with this excerpt from John O'Donohue's blessing on the death of the beloved, which I shared at his memorial. I think it is a verse for all of us. Let us not look for you in memory, or we would grow lonely without you. You would want us to find you in presence, beside us when beauty brightens, when kindness glows, and music echoes eternal tones. When orchids brighten the earth, darkest winter has turned to spring. May this dark grief flower with hope in every heart that loves you. May you continue to inspire us. Yay. Okay, and on that note, we'll break for just a few minutes, just get a warm cup of tea, come back, and we'll have some Q&A.
Carla's got stickers. And guys, a short break. Sometimes I don't want to typecast people, but we have meditators here and psychedelic people. And when you tell meditators to take a 10-minute break, they take an 8-minute break and they like come back. And you tell psychedelic people to take a 10-minute break and they go smoke a joint. They come back in like 45 minutes. So like for real, like 10 minutes, get some tea, come on back. Please join me in thanking all our presenters.
Okay, we'll get started with some questions, and if you have any, that is. Uh,
Therapists are gaining experience seeing how well this facilitates.
yeah, that would you please? Yes, yes, we're starting again. We have to corral the Olympic people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true. They're not here. That's right.
Does anybody have a question or comment or that you can ask? You can ask any of us. You know, if somebody beside. Yeah. Yes. Yes. You can ask any of us. Yes. Okay.
We were saying in the break.
Should we give you this? I'm gonna give you this. Yeah.
Okay. Hi. We were talking in the break how it was beautiful to sort of see the multifaceted views you all gave us. You know, that in any time when you have 6 people who spent so many years, you get a look at a human being that rarely do we see. Sometimes, you know, at a party where you've got your friends, but rarely is it kind of presented. And I'm curious what's the underbelly? Or if there are stories, because, you know, we always tell the best stories, and I don't want the worst stories, but I'm just wondering if there's stories that didn't make it to the book that, you know, kind of play to his, you know, his playful nature, because you hinted to that. And if there's any stories, okay, thank you, HM. I'll give you the mic back. And thank you all for being here.
Who's got underbelly? I mean, definitely, yeah.
I'm just grateful that Ralph isn't having to watch the politics of this country at this moment, because he could start having a scholarly, measured, philosophic discourse about something that made a lot of sense and impacted the larger material world, and then get wound up about the political implications of whatever it was he was talking about, only to end on a real crescendo of frustration with the difficulties in politics.
There's also a piece in my essay, my editor said, you know, because basically I was writing about, you know, all the positives, and my editor said, I think it'd be a really good idea if you put a paragraph in here about what was difficult. So there is a paragraph in there about, just in case you think Ralph is a saint, he could be famously, you know, stubborn and opinionated and rigid. Yes, some of these things. So there were those sides to navigate too. I always felt like I mean, probably one of the reasons why we ended up together. I mean, we worked together for 4 years before we were in a relationship, and because I figured out how to get him to say yes. So I kind of had a magic formula, and that was not easy. It was that you ask him something 3 times, and that I would introduce something and say, you know, I'd like to do this, or what do you think about this? And then I'd go back a second time, leave a little time in between, go back a second time. And then the third time I'd say, okay, how about it? And so most of the time it worked. Roger.
You know, to my mind, Ralph didn't have so much of a dark side, but, you know, it would come up in these ways. And I remember being with you and Ralph, walking back from lunch or something at a psychedelic conference in downtown Oakland, I think, if I've got it placed correctly. We were in a conversation, and I was talking to Ralph about how the other psychedelic guide I spent a lot of time with, who had a different kind of style. I mean, we had this split in the psychedelic therapy community of being sort of cautious about dosing and how far you go. The medicine will take you where you need to go. And then there was the one of taking heroic doses and mixing ketamine and LSD and psilocybin. And he was a little not in favor of that. And he was challenging me around it. And I remember saying, well, what I got from it is a certain kind of sense of self-empowerment for showing up for that. And he was challenging me. I remember you said, Ralph, he just said he got a sense of self-empowerment. So I remember that moment. Yeah. And I remember somewhere in that conversation also, we were kind of, back and forth a little bit in a friendly way. But I said, well, I just want to play devil's advocate, which is something I do. I play devil's advocate a lot. So it's how I try to understand whatever it is we're talking about better. And he said, why would you want to advocate for the devil? And I thought, boy, you really got to be on your toes if you're gonna be, you got to. So anyway, it was fun. It was playful, even though it was sort of a disagreement of sorts.
So Ralph lived in his head and above his head, but he didn't really live in his body very much. So bodily concerns and needs didn't seem to really impact him. And so he was sort of like famous for, so he was channeling, he was doing these guided divination journeys, long, involved, and we're all laying down, and he did not, there was a structure to them, but, and I say everything was very structured in the container, but he'd be sitting there with his eyes closed and he would literally be channeling. And there'd be, lots of spaciousness. He'd ask you a question or something, and then, there wasn't necessarily always like a clear end, right? And but you have to go to the bathroom. But he didn't like if you would get up and go to the bathroom to interrupt him. Okay, so I'd be lifting my head up, and I'd look like to the assistant, and she's like, so okay, well, it's like lay down again. All right, fine. But then there was a perfect time that we all had gone to the bathroom, and we're coming back in, and we're going in for whatever, the third meditation, and he's like sitting there, and he goes, oh, I forgot to go to the bathroom. So there's like a certain way that he was not really of this earth a lot of the time. So.
Oh, I can attest to that. One foot in this world and one foot in other worlds. For sure. Question? Somebody else? Janice.
I'll use my outdoor voice.
Okay.
Knowing that Ralph was seriously practicing intention, attention, and awareness toward the end of his life, would you, Cathy, share a bit about that practice and what it meant to Ralph and what it might mean for us?
Yeah, you know what? I'll let Leigh do it because Leigh has, yeah.
But she'll follow me, yeah. Because we did bring that into this song. So first we set our intention, and we always set our intention with Ralph as a group, individually. We would set our intentions. What's our question when we're going in with it? Is there healing that we're looking for, visioning that we're doing, something we want to better understand? Our intention was always spoken out loud. And if it was murky, he would have us nail it down a little bit. Yeah, just get as clear as we could. So we'd refine it. So we'd hold our intention throughout the journey to help, like a handrail. And then we'd become receptive and attentive to what was going on around us. So the attention, with our intention, our attention. If we have guides, which Ralph totally encouraged, that we get to know different guides. And if they show up in a journey, you don't just assume they're yours. You might politely ask, are you my guide? Or do you have a name? Is there a reason you're here? And they might join you for the journey. So Ralph would often have us bring in our guides or invite in our guides, our ancestors, our soul council. And he'd often say that we pay our guides by paying attention to what they show us, what they say. That's the reciprocity. The reciprocity is paying attention. And finally, with clear intention and receptive attention, we would get awareness. The awareness would come. And typically, we're shown many things. Our awareness is what we're able to absorb in that moment, and potentially to integrate it into our lives. So and he had Post-it notes of intention, attention, awareness all over the house. The bathroom mirror, it is deathbed. Yeah, just that was in his study. That was one of his meditations. And then playing maybe with the order was interesting to him at different times too. But anyway, that's what he meant.
Yeah, I would say, thank you. That gave me a chance to think about the question. I would say that, like, he didn't really talk about it except like in lectures. Like, he didn't talk about that necessarily at home. But I was thinking that I think the way that it showed up for him was he was incredibly intentional about things, about his to-do list, about what he was working on. And even if he's trying to work out a theory or an idea, it just the way he would map it out on his desk and kind of continue to work on it. And then he was just enormously productive. He was like one of the most productive, human beings that I think that many of us have met. He had his list. I mean, he was very intentional. He gave it attention, and I mean, it got done. In fact, it would be like if he got an idea about something, I knew that I only had a certain, if I wanted to have any input or any influence on whatever that was, I knew I had to act really fast because it was going to be done in a certain way, and maybe it wouldn't get done exactly like I wanted it to be done. But anyway, yeah, it was, I think that his formula definitely helped him in this incredibly creative and productive life.
A question that has occurred to me to ask you is how he brought the lessons that he learned from his many spiritual practices, including psychedelics, but many other spiritual practices. He spent time in India and so on, as he was approaching his dying time. And if you're willing to share any of that.
Well, so he really did. He talked a lot about that through his life and wrote about, just how he actually really felt like the greatest benefit of psychedelics was to become comfortable or peaceful with a dying process. And he was, and then, he was really tested by that at the end of his life because he had this lung disease, and so he knew he only had a certain limited time to live. And he so when he got the diagnosis, he got to work. First thing he did was he cleaned out all of his client files, and then he worked on his other files. He made sure all his financial affairs were in order. Not with any angst. I never felt any angst. And then he was in the hospital about a month before he died, and he said, I heard him say once to the doctor, he said, because I think, he knew the end was near, and he said, I don't want to die, but I'm okay with dying. And then when he died, he just died a very peaceful, very, very peaceful death. Very, and I mean, he actually had this library. He wanted to get settled, and he was really kind of anxious about it. And I thought, well, what is he going to do? Die as soon as I get this library settled? And literally the night before he died, I had his library went to Purdue as the Ralph Metzner Library, and my daughter and I had boxed up all the books, 44 boxes. I'd mailed all but 8 boxes. I had 8 boxes in my car to mail the next day. And like the night before he died, I said, well, here's the shelves are empty. They're all done. It's all. And then he died that night. I mean, it was pretty uncanny. And there's an intention, I guess, you know. And but yeah, he was very, 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 very peaceful. He just slipped away in the night. I mean, I was lying next to him, and I think this is kind of interesting. I woke up and I looked at the clock and it said 4:20. I just had to go to the bathroom. I went to the bathroom and I didn't reach over to touch him to see. I just thought he was still asleep. And then I went back to sleep, and I woke up maybe a little after 6, and I reached over, and he was dead. And I just thought, oh, I think he must have died around 4:20 when I woke up. So that's kind of that's the time I consider that he died. No, I don't really know. But then we left his body. I called a really close friend of mine who she came over, my daughter came over, and we left his body, and then we called some friends who came. Janice was there, Leigh, and Leigh will share a little bit about being with his body for a while.
Yeah, Ralph's body was, he's the only person I've sat for hours with after having passed. It was such a blessing. And he had been very intentional about how he wanted the surroundings to be. He wanted there to be either silence or maybe playing some Bach or maybe some Mozart. He had put that in a little document he created for the end of his life. So while Cathy and Sophia went to the airport to pick up Eli, I sat with his body for a few hours and I DJ'd for Ralph. Mostly silence, like he requested, which I appreciate deeply, and bird song, because there's a lot of birds were singing right outside of his window. And this is the next morning when Eli flew in, and some Bach and some Mozart. And I thought a lot about how he had been so fixated on the library, because, Cathy, if you don't know Cathy, Cathy can do anything. She can take care of anything. So that he was fixating on this to-do thing when he's basically married the most capable human on the planet was funny. It's just kind of like, she'll be okay. She'll get, but he really wanted the library. But as I sat in silence with his body, I thought about what a beautiful value it is to just not leave a mess behind, to just take care of it. Yeah, it's gorgeous. What a beautiful blessing. And then he also by his bedside was a book of Ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian forgiveness practice. And thank you. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I knew that was I forgive you. So he was working that. He was in deep gratitude. He was thinking about intention, attention, awareness. It was all evident. It was a beautiful, beautiful transmission, mostly in silence. with his body, and I'm forever changed for that experience, of course.
Thanks. Yeah, even the night before he died, he wanted to clean up everything around his room, or just like Kleenexes, pens, paper. I don't need this anymore. And he even had that like totally clean. And also another part of his dying was, he was very intentional about gratitude. So he actually had worked pretty hard on, cleaning up any human relations that were, that he felt like he needed to connect with somebody or apologize or something. And and then just thank people. And so like a few days before he died, he hands me a note. Here, would you please call my massage therapist and tell her thank you. And she's done a great job and I really appreciate it. And just things like that, like people like that he wanted to reach out to. So that was also tender and beautiful. But yeah, and he always really believed that, people it's like, that's kind of our final responsibility, is to take good care of how we die and, have everything tended and taken care of. And boy, he really did that. He really lived it.
This feels like a strange tone shift after that was beautiful, sacred. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. I have a question about Carly. You mentioned the container, and I feel like there's a kind of container that I've been picking up on in the last 5 years, which is like an almost myopic focus on healing. Like people are really interested in healing, and it's almost like this infinite procedurally generated trauma will just keep appearing for you to keep healing. And I contrast that with the culture that I'm familiar with in the 90s, which was about kind of seeking and spirituality. And there wasn't a lot of healing. Like at the time, we sort of thought trauma was what happened to you if you got in like a car accident, but we didn't have the idea of like, oh, these are healing substances. And I'm curious about the containers that you've been in, and how you've seen them change over time, and the sort of balance between like healing, visionary experiences, and spirituality, and like other sort of like ingredients of the container. I would love to hear the group comment on that a little bit.
Well, I think you have to start with the acknowledgement that everybody has a different needs of what they need to work on and what needs to be healed or changed, and so there's so much variation in that. So, but a little quick vignette, which maybe doesn't quite answer the story because it was very, very idiosyncratic to the moment. But we were doing a circle and we were doing one of the rounds, and again, Ralph was sharing. And in fact, I think he shared this theme on 2 rounds, and he was sharing about a book he was reading that was impressing him in a deep way on the assassination of JFK. Maybe others have heard that, and it was powerful stuff. But in some of the debrief after the circle, it was like, wait, what's with Ralph there? What a buzzkill, It's like. And so, we were kind of processing that, and I did have an opportunity to ask Ralph about it. And Ralph is teaching at every level of the world we live in. He said, we are so jaded behind the assassination of JFK that what better time to examine that than when you're cracked open. I thought, wow. I mean, he is always thinking outside the box. I mean, that. And then what he added to that was that, and it's not about figuring out who did it. It's about understanding that this is what they're capable of.
You want to say something like that?
Yeah.
Well, I think you're picking up on this focus of healing because right now there is a focus. This medicine is going to heal PTSD, and we have to use these terms, and this is what we're doing in order to get it legal. And that's not what we were focused on. So, it was personal growth, it's spirituality. Of course, there's inner healing because that's all part of it. But I would say there were many spokes, right? And whatever your intention you were bringing was going to be, determining the lens that you were listening to, how you were taking in whatever Ralph was sharing. But I mean, he did a number of different meditations. But I remember like one night it was all father work. And so it was an entire night, all masculine, all the music was masculine. The guides that you were he asked you that at one point I said, now call in a god, so it was like you're working the right side of the body, or the right side of the body, you're the other side, the right side of the body for the masculine and inner energy. And so the entire focus is there. Now, depending on what your relationship was with your father or other masculine energies in your world, you might have had a lot of healing to do there, or you might not have, right? But that the opportunity was there. Then the next night we did mother. Okay, so the same thing, the left side, goddess, all feminine singers, etc. And the same thing. It's like so what you brought, your intention, your situation, the opportunity for healing, the opportunity for growth, the opportunity for, like spiritual guidance was all available, but it was, you brought it in through your lens. So I would say that was my how it felt for me.
I think, I think Ralph was distinctively identified with what I would describe as the East Coast school. Like the West Coast school is the kind of prankster Burning Man approach, which is like, let's see how weird we can make this. And would you like to make it a little bit weirder? And how are you doing when we turn up the weirdness meter? And attaching oneself to that kind of embrace of chaos as the value. And when you talk about this kind of very structured kind of intentional approach, it's so very distinctively different. And I feel like it's easy to agree with, venerate, validate, reverence the more structured version of these experiences, but people do get very valid and valuable experiences out of the other end of the spectrum. And I feel a real need to stick up for that sometimes.
Yes, I agree.
One more question, maybe?
I actually do want to address that because before I met Ralph, I spent 10 years, I had zero idea that there was anything therapeutic about these medicines, drugs at all. So I spent 10 years doing recreational drugs, and I had a blast, and I created all kinds of events and parties, and we would, go downtown at Christmas time. And I mean, like hiking and things. And I learned how to navigate. I learned how to be upright. I learned how to engage. I learned such valuable skills. And then someone, introduced me to Ralph, and I was like, oh wow, there's like a whole other world over here. And then I learned about structure and container and such things. So I'm with her too.
Well, piggybacking on this container topic, I'm curious if anyone could share about, getting this picture of him really holding these boundaries, and that sometimes people really pushed up against them or thought, oh, this is overkill. And what, looking back, are there things that seemed in the moment or you felt were too far over in that direction, but that looking back, you appreciated as something that held that container as safe?
I'll jump in for the first answer. Ralph was always creating new layers of ceremony. and structure. And, you know, and sometimes they were great. But, you know, we were high, and it was hard sometimes. And then he would get frustrated. You know, he'd be like, no, you didn't say it the right way. You have to do the thing. And then we would just dissolve in laughter, which I love. But that would frustrate him because he'd be like, listen, we're in, you know, like you're supposed to go. And so it is, Ralph. And that is what I was shown. And, you know, there were structured sentences to say after your share. And you know, and people, you know, just, no matter how many times we would be in the circle and do the rounds, people would just be like, well, okay, I'm done. And we'd all be like, and so it is, and that's what I was shown. So, I mean, to me, I both loved the valiancy of what he was trying to create, right? But I also loved the laughter that we dissolved in, of like, we really wanted to do it, but it was hard.
All right. I said that was the last question. I guess I'll give one more second. Anybody have a last question? I guess not. Okay. Then thank you for being here. And yeah, great audience. Appreciate you. Oh, and little commercial. If you want to buy a book, I'll be out there and I'll sign books. And yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all so much. That was incredible. I honestly wish we had like 6 more hours and we could just do one hour with each of you. Hopefully over time we will have that. I want to take a moment before you go buy a book and tell you about a couple of things that are coming up at Alembic that you might be interested in. Are you guys all down for that, or do you want to go straight to the book? Okay, cool. So on February 23rd, which is a Sunday, we have Kat Harrison here. Do you guys know Kat Harrison? Yeah. So she founded the nonprofit Botanical Dimensions with her late husband, Terrence McKenna. And she is going to be here on the 23rd we have 3 wonderful hours with Kat. I believe it's 1 to 4, but it might be 11 to 1. Hey, what's your name again? Aliciana knows. Kat is going to be talking about healing practices in different traditions, and with a particular focus. She's like if you don't know her, she like straight up talks to plants, and she usually brings some with her. We got to do an aura cleanse with bay leaves from her garden one of the times she was here, and it's just, I can't imagine a better way to spend part of your Sunday. So that's February 23rd. And the following Wednesday evening, since y'all are Wednesday evening people, we have Tina Rasmussen here. So if you guys don't know who Tina Rasmussen is, she learned the jhanas in the Pa-Oxayadaw tradition. And if all of those words mean nothing to you, let me just tell you that she does the most intense kind of meditation with the most intense kind of teacher, and yet is like this beautiful, wonderful, lovely human being. And she's going to be speaking about the Enneagram as a tool for spiritual practice. That is, I'm just going to say this. I mean, I like everything we do here, but that is like an unmissable event. So that's 2 Wednesdays from now. Same time, same place. So I hope to see you all there. And please join me before you go to the lobby and buy a book. Please join me in thanking our presenters one more time. Thank you so much.
And the latest edition of that podcast is with Miss Cathy Coleman. So
Psychedelic Divas. Check it out.
Yeah.
So the next one. Yeah, quite an artist too. The connection to plants. She draws them. Okay. I forgot that. And ancient rendezvous. missed that. She's coming.
Oh,
yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's like sending your kids to college. Yeah.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm from David as well.
Another David.
And
Okay.
David, my so the you know the story. My what? Why not?
Judaism is patriarchal, just like all the other Judeo Christians.
Why is
I think it is patriarchal because otherwise you can't be sure.
Who I used to see a lot. And he plays the and conferences around the world. And it's got his name on the back of the
One thing.
and I wore it in case I saw him. That's the
Which is
mutual friends.
all the other countries?
Years ago, yeah.
Your wife is one thing to her daughter. Will give it to her daughter.
Oh, you are?
Which is